about elevating Tier 1 instruction through high leverage practices and strategies for inclusive classrooms.
No.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jocelyn Washburn. I'm going to give it all to you.
Thank you so much. So I am now screen sharing my slides. And great, thank you for nodding. I am so happy to be here and that we nowadays have the virtual tools that will allow us to still be together even when the weather is preventing us from being in person. I want to start by sharing with you what my very first day of teaching was like and some of those initial years. Because preparing for this presentation, I really have reflected on those days and my career. So picture the very first day I was a special education teacher in a high school, and I went through the whole day and there was so much energy.
One moment, Dr. Washburn.
I think you're muted.
Hang on 1 second.
Okay, thank you so much. So I did not realize that I was muted, so I'm going to have a chance to start again. Okay, so thank you so much for being here, and I'm very excited to present virtually and that we're able to spend the time together online, even though we're not in person. To begin, I wanted to go back to share with you my very first day teaching. So I started as a high school special education teacher, and this was in 2003. On the first day at the end, I was standing in the hall and I'm just checking in the chat that there's still, everything is okay. It's showing the meeting is full for others. Okay. That's not related to me, so I'll keep going. So anyways, the hallway was full of students. They're running down, almost running. It felt that way, the high energy of running out to the bus. And I just remember in that moment, feeling so happy that I was in the right place and a surge of energy that I had purpose and a sense of belonging. And that was on my very first day of teaching. And so in those initial years, right away as a special education teacher, navigating all that it entailed, as I prepared for this presentation, I reflected on the IEP meetings at that time. And I was teaching English 9 and English 10 as self-contained classes. I also had one class that was co-taught. In our IEP meetings, when we would talk about placement, the conversation was, were the students ready for general education classes? Did they have the skills to be successful in general education? That was more than 20 years ago. But what I noticed then was that the onus was on the students. And if they were ready, where now change takes a while, but the shift has to be, are the adults not only making a place for them, but providing access to the general education setting. So that's the mission of this session, is elevating Tier 1 instruction by all professionals serving students with disabilities to use inclusive settings. So fast forward through now, and I have been an instructional coach working with teachers of all content areas because all teachers do serve students with disabilities. And I'm currently a researcher designing and testing instructional practices for teachers to use in their classrooms as a part of my role at the Center for Research on Learning at the University of Kansas. So let's get into the goals for this session. We are going to have an overview so that you can discover the high leverage practices for students with disabilities. by looking through, we'll go through each domain. And as we go through each domain of HLPs, we're going to unpack the principles behind the high leverage practices, and I'll also share practical strategies so that you can think about how could this apply in your context, as well as reflect on how does this integrate within the MTSS framework. So the plan for the session organization is for each domain. Right now you're looking at the organization of the HLPs. We have our collaboration domain, data-driven planning, instruction and behavior in academics, and then intensify and intervene as needed. So we'll work through what are the HLPs in that domain, why do they work, and then how do you use them? So I want to start by giving a little bit of the backstory of how these came about, because it helps to define what they mean, why they're important, and that they can really give us a common language to know what is good instruction for all students with disabilities, and then certainly to benefit all students, because honestly, it's good instruction. And so it all started back prior to 2015. A work group was gathered of educators across the United States, and they were assembled by the Council for Exceptional Children and the Cedar Center, based out of Florida, to create the high leverage practices for students with disabilities. And the idea was modeled after the high leverage practices that were put together for general education, in that they had to decide what were around 20 practices that would be foundational to instruction, have high frequency of use, were research-based, and could be broadly applicable in any classroom to support students with disabilities. That's a big task. They were reviewing hundreds of practices. When you think about all that we do as educators, there's so much more than the 22 that we're going to review today. So they, through the work group, narrowed them down to 22 practices. And that was in then 2017 was the first report, which was a research synthesis behind why were these 22 practices selected. Now well, fast forward then to 2024 when they were revised, and the 22 practices are still there, but they're now organized in a different way. And so that's something that we're going to really look at, that this new organizational structure helps to integrate the practices together, and how that they relate to each other, and how they can really become all of them can be used within our practices. And so I want to make sure that you have access to the guide, the book. And so here on the QR code, but I'm going to put in the chat also a direct link. Pull that up. And the chat is not letting me type in the box. That's a strange, I was earlier. Okay, so the QR code will take you there. You can download the whole PDF file of the book. You can also purchase it if you want a hard copy, but in the immediate, you'd be able to look at the PDF file. I want you to have this as an ongoing resource that you may look at parts of it now, but mostly you'll be looking at it later. During the breakout session that I'm leading in the afternoon, we'll also get back into the guidebook. So if you wanted to open it on your browser, then you would have it available for later. So in the 2024, there was feedback collected from the field for how the HLPs were being used, and that drove why the 2024 revision came out. What they found was that because the 22 practices seemed like a lot, even though, remember, I said that they drew down from hundreds of practices to 22, some organizations were narrowing it and saying, let's focus on 5. And so they really wanted to think about how can we organize them in a way that people wouldn't feel the need to just focus on a few, but rather to see the bigger picture of how they interrelate and support each other. So that's why we now have the pillar organizational structure to help. And I think throughout this presentation, you'll be able to see how they really do relate to each other. The other big change was changing the title from high leverage practices in special education to for students with disabilities. So you can imagine it's a subtle change, but a big difference because, like I mentioned earlier, all professionals are serving individuals with disabilities across all grade levels, all content areas, and all schools. And so when we say these are the practices that are in special education, it creates some silo, right? So we want to have it for students with disabilities and that we can all practitioners can use them. So they're integrated into all settings. And then since 2017, there have been many books taking different angles of how you could apply the HLPs in different settings, college setting, high school, elementary school, all the different ways that you could look at how would these integrate. We also can think about evidence-based practices and how do they connect. So evidence-based practices are made up of HLPs. But as a reciprocal relationship, HLPs are based on what has been shown effective in research. So they're research-based practices that can be applied, where an evidence-based practice might be assembled in a way that it can be tested to show its specific effectiveness. So they do have a relationship with each other. And then states have adopted HLPs as different frameworks as to encourage how can we advance and move forward in our goals for all students. And so what else? You might be thinking about your background and understanding of what has been going on since 2017 when these were first published. I wanted us to think about the mission of serving students with disabilities, and that is the goal that we are providing specially designed instruction. And so on the screen, we have the definition of specially designed instruction, that we're adapting the content, the methodology, or the delivery of instruction, and it's based on the unique needs of a child resulting from their disability. So we have to know what their needs are to make those instructional decisions. And the bigger goal is that we're doing this so that students can have access to the general curriculum with the least restrictive environment as a part of their FAPE, their free access to education. So we are using the high leverage practices in order to achieve that broader mission. So this is an article that I just really love. It came out around the time that the HLP, that first HLP book came out, and it has this nested visual. We have so many terms in education in general, and especially in thinking about students with disabilities and special education services. So this article organizes those. How do they relate and connect to each other? So like I said, specially designed instruction is this outer circle. And we can use, when you move inward to the circle, high leverage practices to achieve specially designed instruction. And then you go even narrower, one of the high leverage practices is explicit instruction. And then we have also a high leverage practice where we can make explicit instruction, we can intensify it. And then it can become an intensive intervention for students who need it. And so this really helps, I think, to try to see how it can drill down and also move backwards, that is, we're doing all of this in order to provide specially designed instruction. So we are going to try a chatterfall to be engaged in the chat. And so I'm hoping that this is not going to have any chat challenges. Open your chat window. And the way that the chat works, and by the way, my chat is now live again. So I'm putting the direct link to the HLP book. And I'm noticing now I'm in the chat, there are some individuals having trouble seeing the slides. So I don't know how to resolve that technology problem, but we can share the slides with everyone to catch up if you're not able to fix that tech problem. What I want to do for the Chatterfall, and the way this works is you don't type in the chat yet. So you're going to think about your morning so far and pick from the color chips a color that you think, this is just fun, could represent your morning so far and why. And so as you think of it, open your chat and type in, but don't hit enter yet, because the Chatterfall is I will give a countdown and then everyone will enter at one time. So I'm hoping we don't break the system since we've been having some technical problems this morning already, but let's see what happens. So we're going to pause so everyone can think about your morning. Okay, so if you have that in there and thinking about why, so everyone, I'm going to say 3, 2, 1, enter. So enter your answer. Yeah, I see lots of comments on the weather, and I think that is true. The weather can influence how we feel about our day. And
Okay, don't judge me. That's magenta, right?
Yes,
Okay, thanks.
that's what I was gonna do. but
Mic back off.
all right, well, thank you for doing that. We are going to do a couple of different activities where we share throughout the session. And so now you are ready for that as far as finding your chat window, and we'll keep on going. So we're going to dive into the collaboration domain. And so here I wanted to share with you about how when I first was collaborating, I did have a first experience that was not ideal. So in that first year, when I had some of the self-contained classes, one of the first semester, I co-taught English 9. And when I went to go meet with, I was a first year teacher, and the other teacher was actually in her 40th year. And she handed me a clipboard, and she said that my role would be to take notes while she provided a lecture and circulate the room and make sure that the students had accurate notes, and if they needed help, they could copy off of my notes that I had taken. I was very disappointed. So things were like that for a while. It was one semester, fortunately, but that was not what I was learning in my master's program. At that time, I was simultaneously enrolled in a class. And so the next semester, I co-taught with a different teacher, and we attended professional development on co-teaching. And we learned together, and we decided we were going to go all in. And so we came up with a motto that it takes invitation and initiation. So the general education teacher in that case invited me to play an active role as a real teacher. And that was the identity that I wanted, to be a learning specialist and think through the lens of a student and how learning the curriculum was for them so that we could adjust instruction to meet their needs. I had initiation, and we together were able to have shared expertise so that we could have that partnership and teach. And it was beautiful. I loved co-teaching with Lori. We really it was rewarding and, as well, and fun, and we connected with each other and with our students. So when it's working well, we have the advantages that we're going to talk about with collaborating with professionals. So the first pillar, HLP, and there are 6 pillars, is to collaborate with professionals to increase student success. The other pillar, HLP, in the collaboration domain is to collaborate with families to support student learning and secure needed services. Now, I mentioned that, or it was mentioned in my in the opening, that I have been writing about the HLPs, and the one that I have been writing about the most is HLP 2, which is organize and facilitate effective meetings. When the reorganization occurred of the HLPs and I learned that HLP 2 would become embedded, at first I thought, does that mean it's not as important? We have 6 pillars, and then we have a whole bunch of embedded HLPs. But absolutely not. The HLPs that are embedded actually are needed to support more than one pillar, or they're integral to what it means to use the pillar HLP. So we have, when we're collaborating with families, oftentimes that is in a meeting setting. And when we're collaborating with our colleagues, it's not always just right in the classroom. Obviously, there's a lot that surrounds that. So let's take a look at what that looks like. In the book that you have access to, this table is on page 31. This is a portion of the table. I want you to look at it and notice, of these 9 types of collaboration and the various purposes, what do you observe or notice about these types of collaboration? So many of them are meetings or outside the classroom. And so when a person decides to become an educator, probably a driving force behind that is a love for students, a love for your content area, a love for guiding youth. It might not have been a passion for working with other adults, but it turns out that it is foundational to providing a coordinated, individualized education program, and to really, beyond students with disabilities, all of the collaboration to make the school work and function well and operate, and all of those advantages that can come from collaboration. So going back to what are those advantages? It's a sharing of expertise and perspectives among professionals and families. That is what will allow us to have an understanding of each student's holistic needs, when we can hear different perspectives on how the student is experiencing schooling in a variety of settings. It is how we have a well-planned and implemented IEP. It allows us to monitor student success, their progress, and make decisions together about how to improve, and then to assure each student's well-being in schools. So it's not always about the academics. A lot of times it's about what is their experience, that they are able to belong and be experiencing positively their learning. So we have a responsibility. It is required that we collaborate for all the reasons that I've been sharing. But the other side of it is this immense resource that collaboration is for us as professionals. We are able to learn from each other, we support each other, and we can grow. And so that's going to lead to us staying in this profession longer and having a richer experience with what we're doing on the day-to-day. And so when we think about the benefits, there are research-based benefits of collaboration. There's a causal relationship between what's happening during collaboration and student outcomes. So when teachers are using data to make decisions, we have better outcomes, but they're more satisfied when they're using data in that collaboration. So you have that centerpiece of the conversation around students' needs. So we think about collaboration as improving also teacher retention, which we need so much to be paying attention to what can make the working conditions improved for professionals in the education field. We feel more efficacious when we are collaborating because we are having better outcomes, but then we know that our efforts are tied to those outcomes. And so we will be more likely then to stay in our jobs when we feel that we are doing good work. We're putting it's hard work and heart work together and that we're making a difference. So here's a tool that you might want to do later. I wanted to just share this idea with you. I conducted a survey study about collaborating with colleagues. And so 100 educators from this different states and different roles, elementary through high school. And this was general education teachers and special education teachers who took the survey. They were asked about their perspective on how important different behaviors are to collaborating with colleagues, what mindset is important, and the environmental supports. And so we had 36 items and they were organized 12 from each of these categories. And there was universal agreement on the value of collaboration. But the challenges were related to making the behaviors that make it happen and having trust among colleagues, time for collaboration, and structured collaboration that includes access to the resources that are needed. So we all want to make this happen, but it's how. How can we make this happen? So this activity as a takeaway is what is already strong. So when you ask yourself, what's important to you with what types of actions or skills need to be happening for collaboration to be effective? What mindsets have to be in place? And then what is the environment? Brainstorm what those look like, put a star next to which ones are already strong, and then circle the ones that you would want to improve either with your partner or a team or just on your own, thinking about how you are playing, what's your role in the collaboration. And then the last step is to identify a person who can help you improve these items. So it might be not just going to who your collaborators are, but is there an assistant principal or the director of special education, someone in a leadership role that can make decisions that could help with creating a stronger environment so that collaboration can happen. All right, so here is an engagement activity. We're going to do the Chatterfall again. But I don't enter anything because I want us to have some good thinking time. So we're going to have 2 minutes of quiet time for this activity before you put anything in the chat. I'd like if you could select an object. So we're going to do some metaphorical thinking. You can pick a different one that's not on the screen too. You could decide something totally different. But ask yourself, how is collaboration involved in this object? And then in the chat, what you'll put is collaboration is like the object because, and then say why. And so let's have some quiet time. I'll set the timer for 2 minutes and then we'll share. Okay, time is up. Let's go ahead and enter, if you haven't already, put your answers in. I'm going to say, this is our Chatterfall. So 3, 2, 1, go. Enter your simile. These are a lot of fun. I wish we could keep all of these. Are amazing. All these different. Thank you for really getting into it and examining the object in order to think, how is it like collaborating in different ways? Nice work there. Okay. We're going to dive into the next domain, which is data-driven planning. And we're going to look at there are several HLPs here, but they're anchored by the pillar HLP, use student assessment data, analyzing instructional practices, and making necessary adjustments that improve student data. What I really appreciate about pillar HLP 6 is that when we're going all the way back to my first story of my first observations as a teacher in the IEP meeting in those initial years, was that we're thinking about assessing students and we're focused so much on how they're performing. But in this HLP pillar, we're analyzing our instructional practices to make a difference. So we are integrating what is our responsibility within collecting that data. So then the embedded HLPs that support us being able to do this. So I kind of see the pillar HLPs as an umbrella and the embedded ones happen within that process. We are using multiple sources of information. And so in this case, we want to develop a comprehensive learner profile, not just quantitative data, but what's the qualitative data tell us, so we understand a student's strengths and their needs. With HLP 5, then, we take those multiple sources we have to interpret and communicate assessment information so that we can collaborate. So we're back to connecting with the other HLP domain of collaboration, that we, all of the adults who are working together need to understand what the assessment means, why it's important. And then we use that information to identify and prioritize long and short-term goals. So now we're really connecting to specially designed instruction. We're understanding unique needs and we are setting goals. Then what are we doing? We're systematically designing instruction toward the goal. So then we are standing back and saying, where are they? Where are they now? Where do we want them to be? And how will we, what will we do to fill that? So here, what I want us to look at is within this domain, how we have to have data literacy skills as professionals serving students with disabilities. There's a lot, on the left, it shows the assessment purposes in specially designed instruction. So we have different tools that we use that are gathering data for a screening purpose. What are broadly, what are needs, what are possible barriers for learning or behaviors that are coming up. Diagnosis, a process where we're using multiple assessments to understand what the instruction should look like. We have eligibility, interpreting what were those assessments during eligibility, and then progress monitoring, being able to know how can it connect directly to the instruction and how can we also check the bigger picture progress. So, wow, I didn't want to share this to feel overwhelming. I want us to stand back and appreciate the expertise that everyone who in our field that is supporting students with disabilities has, because of the vast array of assessments that we have to know how to use and how to interpret them.
We have several team
In-
members that can't get in.
in a meaningful way. And so the examples of the different instruments that we would then have to know how to interpret are standardized assessments, criterion referenced, curriculum based, using interviews and interpreting what some thematic conclusions we might draw from those, rating scales, timed interval, like during an observation or other observation of looking at a different protocol for collecting, say, behaviors in the classroom. So it's a wide range that what we are expected to be able to know and do. And I think people talk a lot about how we have so much data that we can't use it. And so here's how I want to propose a solution to that, because it's true, that is reality, that we may have too much data to know how do we use it, is to think about how you can create a habit for using, say, a formative assessment data. And so there's two ways to think about this. There's a lot of protocols out there. Just pick any one, any one, and use it so that it can become your own. So there's the two ways that I'm thinking about this is it becoming a habit or a mindset. I have new information. What do I do? What am I going to be able to do with it? And to make a decision to do any kind of action to adjust instruction, provide corrective feedback, positive feedback to students on their learning or their behavior. That's one degree at a personal level. Then there's at a team level, and that might be picking a protocol where you go into even more depth, where each of the steps might be really analyzing the data and using documentation and really sitting down together and having concentrated time. So there's two sides of this when we have volumes of data, and I completely relate to it. Later, when I was teaching English 10, we gave a quiz and half the students bombed it. And so the co-teacher and I, we said, well, what should we do about that? Is it important enough that we go back and reteach that? Or why did we give that assessment? It should have been important enough for us to know that we have to respond to what this told us. It tells us that something was wrong with the assessment, something was wrong with our instruction, because that it didn't align. And so having a chance to make it have a purpose is the goal here. So on the left, this is an example in a chapter that Dr. Bonnie Billingsley and I wrote in a book on HLP. The whole book is on all the HLPs, but this one is about using data this is a scenario of collaborating with a teacher and a family member. And actually in the breakout session, I'll share more about that example. But just having the visual of starting with what are the goals, what is the current level, what will we do to help the student meet the goals, and how will we monitor progress? On the other side of the screen is Dylan William. He is an author who has a lot out there about the power of feedback. And this is a nice, simple, this is where it could become a habit, because you could ask myself these questions. Where's learner now? How will they get there? Or start with where are they going? Where are they now? And how will they get there? And then just having that really quick so that we can make it usable right away. This is a zoom in on just this set of HLPs so that you can look at it while I tell you another story, because I want you to right now think about your metaphor, the metaphorical thinking we just did. So if you did baking or farming, a sport, or the race car, think of what that is, because you're going to do an activity with that. But first, I'm going to tell you a metaphor that I was reflecting on, which was about how 3 years ago, almost 4, I came down, I had shingles. And we had just done a trash cleanup on our road. And so I thought that I had poison ivy. It was on this left side of my face. I started to have a rash. But then I started getting this real heaviness behind my eyes and a headache. And so I went to the doctor. While I was there, the doctor asked me some background information. She said, "Are you still not sleeping well?" Yes, I'm still not sleeping well. Are you under a lot of stress at work? Yes. This is not poison ivy. This is shingles. And so she then, so I learned a whole lot about what was under the surface. And so when we think about, as an analogy for a classroom, what you think is one thing, you gather more information and data and you learn it's not just what you can see on the surface, but what is happening underneath. So I learned a lot about nerves, the nervous system, and I had a treatment plan with painkillers. And I also had to immediately go to the eye doctor because it can go into your eye. So I had to go see a specialist. And then we monitored and I went back to see how was I doing so that it had not gone into my eye. And so there's a lot of new jargon that I didn't know about in the medical field. And so we have to learn all of this in order to interpret and understand the information and the assessment to understand what's going on beneath the surface. So I want you to do this now with your metaphor. Keep the same one and ask yourself, how is data used in this object? What types of data are important to consider? So not thinking about the multiple sources of data. And then what jargon would you personally need to learn if that's, you're an expert in that field? Because others who you need to collaborate with are going to need to understand that too, what all that data means. And so I want you to work on this for 3 minutes. We're gonna have quiet time to see if you can go deeper with your metaphor and examine the data that you're using. Okay, so time is up. If you want to put as an option, because I know this one's a lot to type, if you want to put any reflections in the chat and share what you realized about the data that's involved in your metaphor, so you're building onto it. All right, this was great. Thank you so much. I really would be interested in, these I love metaphorical thinking. I think it's kind of, it stretches our minds. So I hope you appreciated having a chance to think like that too. We're going to move now into the next domain, which is a very big set of HLPs in this domain. They are organized under two pillar HLPs. HLP 7 is focused on establishing consistent, organized, and responsive learning environments. So think about the learning environment. And then HLP 16 is focused on explicit instruction. So they're together because the learning environment is going to affect the ability to provide explicit instruction. But we can use explicit instruction to create the learning environment that we want to have in our classrooms. So there's this back and forth between these. So we're going to look a little bit more closely at the learning environment first, and then we'll move into looking at the explicit instruction pillar. And I want us to think also, as we have been throughout the session, about specially designed instruction and how this also is organized. I think that when you look at the embedded HLPs, what to teach, that's adapting content when we think about specially designed instruction. And then the how to teach is about adapting the methodology that we're using. So to begin with, thinking just about the learning environment portion, we can use explicit instruction to teach the social behaviors of students that will build the learning environment. So we can think at the individual level, teaching social behaviors, but also at the group level. What are examples and non-examples of the behaviors that we want to see to achieve the learning environment? And you're thinking about your classroom norms and your routines and procedures for the whole class, but also for specific lessons or structures. So we would look at, for example, if we were to use one of the HLPs is on flexible grouping. If we're going to use flexible grouping, then we have to teach the students how to behave in the flexible grouping so that those will be effective. And so the idea is that all students, thinking pre-K all the way through 12th grade, it's important to explicitly teach the expectations for the behaviors that we want to see. And even for the older students, I want to advocate that we still do that for them out of fairness to them, because by the time they're in middle school, and then high school, they're moving from teacher to teacher. And Dr. Timothy Shanahan, a long time ago, shared this analogy that I just really resonated with me, is that it's like moving from country to country. So if you're going on a trip, we're going to check the weather. What clothes are we going to bring? When we get there, what are the cultural norms of that country? Do they when they're ordering, do they stand in line, or do you shout out your order? You need to know all of those things when you travel. For a student, they're going from classroom to classroom, and then even within that, different activities or lessons have different expectations for how to behave. And so it's the right thing to make it clear to them so that they are able to be successful in those different settings. How does this teacher want us to behave versus that teacher? And of course, it helps to have common school-wide norms, but even within that, there's going to be individual differences teacher to teacher. So we want to explicitly teach to achieve the learning environment that we want to have in our classrooms. And then we can also use some of the other embedded HLPs within this, like providing scaffolds, reminders on the wall, sentence starters for engagement, and that's how we can really look at some of those embedded HLPs to support creating the learning environment. So we're going to go to the explicit instruction arm of the instruction domain. And again, looking at then these embedded HLPs, I'm going to go through a couple different examples to highlight a few of these embedded HLPs because it would not be possible to go one at a time right now in this time frame. But we're thinking again about using explicit instruction to adapt content. And so now we look at those metacognitive and cognitive strategies and helping students to generalize what they're learning. And then we can think about adapting methodology by adapting tasks, providing scaffolds, and providing feedback as another important one, which also is important in the learning environment as well. So explicit instruction is one of the most well-researched practices in special education. So when we think about its importance, it's applicable in all grade levels, all content areas, and it has research behind it for the different disability groups. So if we can check what we're doing, that it aligns to the principles and the structure of explicit instruction, then we can expect that we're going to have improved outcomes and achieve goals for our students. So when I was teaching high school, I had a student who was in 9th grade, and he was reading in his IEP, it said he was reading at the 2nd grade level. And he had also a spelling dictionary as an accommodation. And at that time, it was actual paper dictionary. And he would misspell when he was writing, but because he would check the words he definitely knew that he couldn't spell. He would look those up, but there were lots of words he assumed that he could spell them, and then he would misspell those also. So you can picture his reading and his writing skills as a 9th grader. So I had him in English 9, and I was fortunate that in my first year teaching, I learned the paraphrasing strategy from the strategic instruction model. And I was able to teach that strategy to help my students work on their IEP goals using materials and passages that were appropriate to the 9th grade English language arts curriculum. And so I had that nice match between providing the content that was grade level appropriate and a strategy that would help perform a skill. And those are provided through explicit instruction. So with DeMario, I taught him that strategy as well as a sentence writing strategy. And then I had him again in 10th grade. He was in my self-contained 10th grade class, and I taught him more strategies. And then in 11th grade, I was able to teach a learning strategies elective course, and I taught him additional study strategies, more writing, more reading. And in 11th grade, that's when in Virginia, the students take their reading and writing end of course assessment. He came up to me in the hallway and was excited because he wanted to tell me that he had passed his writing test. And he said to me, "Why hasn't anyone taught me like this before?" And that I just remember that so clearly because it caught me off guard. I felt immediately that I wanted to defend what his prior education had been like, but I also recognized that he was saying thank you at the same time to me because I had taught him certain strategies that he really needed in order to meet the expectations at the high school level using explicit instruction. And so what did that instruction look like? And I want to use this story to really anchor what worked for him now and why hadn't he had an opportunity to have that type of learning yet. So the hallmarks of explicit instruction are teaching critical content. So really understanding what's most important to dedicate the time that explicit instruction takes. So not everything has to be taught with explicit instruction, but know what matters most and use explicit instruction with that content, those skills or those concepts. Breaking down the skills so that they are in smaller units and then students can have success in an incremental way towards a broader goal. Using examples and non-examples are really, really important for students to recognize that they do understand a concept or what something looks like and sounds like or doesn't. Providing lots of opportunities to respond. So that's where a teacher is able to check and redirect when they're having a lot of opportunities to listen to their students or to check their work. And then it's I do, we do, you do that I think that, is definitely easy to remember and is out there, but to really unpack what does that mean? With I do, it's modeling not just the think aloud, but physically what something looks like. When a proficient person does it, unpack it for students so that they can see that it's not just magically happening. And sometimes if we're proficient readers or writers, we are doing it so quickly and we have to slow down and figure out how do we do that and reveal that for students. And then teachers vary the intensity based on needs. And so, for example, some students require a lot of feedback to help them advance. But other students, it's not necessarily the feedback, it's the increased model, and they study you modeling that, and they're able to be that component of explicit instruction. It makes a difference. So your professional knowledge is going to help you to know which aspects of an explicit instruction meet the student's needs. So when you're thinking about a lesson, the parts to organize the lesson are the opening and activating prior knowledge or reviewing those prerequisites. I would also say this is the time to explicitly provide what are the behaviors that you want to see for the engagement in the lesson. And so either eliciting that from students to say, and so this is the type of lesson we're doing, what does that look like? Or telling them we're doing something that, we're going to use flexible grouping for this, and what does that look like? Modeling, like I mentioned with think alouds, a skill or a concept, and then guided practice. This is the we do. The most important part of this is the with feedback, making sure that that's where they are practicing in a way that they are able to have on the spot guidance. And then independent practice, the you do. I want to emphasize here that it doesn't automatically mean hands off. There can still be monitoring and feedback and encouragement and guidance while the students are practicing. It's not a quiz environment. And then closing. And research shows that this gets skipped a lot, but in fact, it might be the first time that students hear a most important message about a concept or a skill. The repetition is really necessary. And so it's reasonable. I know why it happens. The bell rings or we're in a rush. We have to move to what's next. But to try to remember to go back and revisit the learning goal to help them see the forest for all the trees. What's the big idea and the takeaway from each lesson? So when we look at some of the specific cognitive and metacognitive strategies, that is a big part of explicit instruction, and then supporting students to generalize it. Scaffolded supports, that's the building blocks, when you're analyzing a practice and breaking it down for students and helping them to have success with it, and then providing feedback that is positive and constructive for both learning and behavior. So I'm going to lead us into another opportunity to think more deeply about one area. And so we're going to think about a strategy. So I want you to all have kind of a fuller definition of what that is in front of you while we do this next exercise. So a strategy just at a surface level is an individual's approach. So how do you do something? But when you are trying to prepare to teach someone how to do something, you have to break it down. And how would you unpack that? So then you think, well, it's how do I think and act when I'm preparing to do this strategy? I'm planning for it. How do I think and act when I'm actually doing it? I'm executing it. And how do I think and act when I reflect on and say, did that work? Did I achieve the goal or task or the assignment that I might be using this strategy for? So that's what it would take to design, you know, the strategy instruction that we would use explicit instruction to teach students. So with HLP 14, I really appreciate this breakdown. What's the difference between a cognitive strategy and a metacognitive strategy? And we do both, and we do them both together at the same time, or we could do them separately. But cognitive we're learning and solving problems. So like these are very academic. You're thinking summarizing, note-taking, applying grammar rules. But meta is when you're thinking about your thinking. So now we're actually looking at how can we support students to learn how to monitor themselves while they're doing these other strategies. So now we're monitoring comprehension. They're monitoring, regulating how they plan for something or evaluate their progress, or even asking for help. Knowing what they need, helping them to learn who they are as learners. So here's your prompt. So I want we're going to either stick with your same object if you want to keep building along the way, or you could pick something new. So identify a daily living task, or like a task that happens regularly with, say, the sports analogy you're working on, or baking, whatever, a task that's within that. But what we're going to try to do is like a task analysis, except we're going to focus more on the thinking as we reflect on what's happening. So I want us to recognize all the decisions that we have to make when we're doing something. And this is how, when you're, say, modeling for a student, how you can prepare for that so you can really unpack it and that the students can observe what's happening in the mind while you're performing a skill. Okay, so everybody we're going to do this one kind of more like step by step together. So first, go ahead and determine what is that. I'm going to share an example of putting on a coat. Okay, so hopefully you have yours. And now think of 3 subtasks. So my goal is I want to put a coat on before I go outside. What do I have to do to get to that point? So I'm going to have to check the weather, which I'm notoriously terrible about doing, except for when I was preparing to come to Tulsa. I checked it like every 5 minutes. Check your closet. What are my choices? Am I going to need a raincoat or just a hoodie? Or am I going to need my winter coat? Then I select a match. So now I'm having to actually connect the weather with the closet. And I know we're breaking this down. This happens like in a split second, right? But when we're thinking of this as an analogy for teaching students, we have to observe that that is what happened in our mind. So then I have to go to an open space, just, walking away from the closet. I'm not necessarily putting it on right there on the spot. So I'm walking away and I'm putting my arms through the armholes. So I want you to do that. Have at least 3. There's probably more. I had 4 here. No, I had 5. 5. So after you have your steps, and maybe you did, brushing teeth, how would you break that down? What's happening when you do something, a daily task? So now here's where I'm going to just set the timer for some think time. So we'll have 2 minutes to just think about these things. How difficult is each of those subtasks? Like what might be difficult about it for any particular reason? How long does each one take? And just because it's quick doesn't mean it wouldn't necessarily have something difficult about it. How often and when when does a person engage in this subtask? So what's the frequency of whether this is something that's happening often, meaning it's really important to make sure that we have a path to successfully doing it. And then what are the decisions being made? And that's where we can unpack the cognitive or the metacognitive strategy that is occurring when we perform that task. Okay, so I'm going to set our 2-minute timer for quiet time. Okay, time is up. Right, so thank you for doing that exercise. When we are thinking about teaching students specific strategies and using explicit instruction, we will have a continuum of explicit instruction that might be needed, or different components might need to have more or less explicitness to that instruction. So we're going to look at then the last pillar, which is intensifying instruction as needed. And we'll look at some of the big ideas behind this and thinking of it at a also at a conceptual level of what is happening and why would we intensify instruction. So when we look at this one, it's focusing on individualizing supports for students with significant or persistent learning or behavioral needs when the less intensive instruction or support has not been effective. So this might be the case that this is happening within an MTSS framework where, say, Tier 3 instruction is provided in a structured setting. But it also could be that we intensify within all of the tiers. So even when we have Tier 1 and Tier 2, recognizing that there is a need to intensify it, how would we intensify it? So that's what we're going to look at, is how would you intensify the instruction right there on the spot, but also looking at within Tier 3, how might you also intensify instruction based on data? So the essential on page 146 in your book, these are the essential components of intensive instruction. You'll recognize that the first two are a part of the data-driven planning domain. And so we already see connections to the other domains, and that this would be present for all instruction. We would have learning goals, and we would have systematic, explicit, and well-paced instruction plans. So 1 and 2 are consistent for all types of instruction. when we think about number 3, which says frequent progress monitoring, we are also providing progress monitoring, but when it's intensive, what would we do to the progress monitoring to make it more intensive? It would become more frequent. And then we are more often going through a cycle of then making decisions on how to adjust instruction. And then for number 4, opportunities to practice and respond. We want to be able to hear from the students, or to, if it's an action they're taking or verbally, practicing and responding, so that we can then, again, provide more feedback as well as adjust instruction more often. How do we increase the opportunities to practice and respond? We might have to change the student-teacher ratio in order to make that happen. So that's where we could use flexible grouping if this is happening within the class, or it might be where then we are determining that tier 3 instruction is needed. And then number 5 is opportunities for feedback. And so having increased feedback, more frequent feedback, or the type of feedback can be made more intensive. So a big component of the Pillar 20 Intensify Instruction is the database individualization cycle. And so in this case, you're thinking about, what am I doing? I'm providing a secondary intervention with fidelity. So I'm using an evidence-based practice that, if used as designed, I should be able to achieve similar results as was determined from studies on this practice. So that's like the beginning mindset here. And then you collect and review progress monitoring data using validated assessments. So now I have data that is external to the intervention, that is a check. Is this working? Is this instruction working? I can also use within the intervention assessments that are very closely tied to what's being practiced. So more of a formative assessment within the intervention. Then I'm reviewing that diagnostic data to decide, how's it going? Am I going to adapt the instruction? And this is where you could decide to intensify, looking at increased feedback, increased modeling. What is it that you might have to adapt about the intervention using your professional knowledge and based on student needs, but while keeping core components in place? So that's the piece where it takes knowledge of core components, your professional knowledge of what the students need, and uniting those to make decisions that will help students advance, and then continuing progress monitoring. So that's a core here of how we would be thinking while we're providing intensive instruction. So back to this idea of collaboration. If students are having a specific intervention, I'd like to have you think about some specific ideas for how teachers could collaborate inside or outside of classroom time that would support HLP 21, which is generalize and maintain the gains they're making during that intensive intervention. And there's this twofold. So if you could think about strategies in 2 directions. You have your teacher teaching the intervention. What do other teachers need to know about that intervention to support students to generalize in other places, other settings, for other tasks? And then what does the intervention provider, the specialist, need to know from those other settings in order to make the intervention more effective and more practical, or to have more ability to generalize? So in your setting, in your context, think about in your school or your district, what would that look like? And just jot down, and we'll have 2 minutes to just think of a few ideas so that you have something to walk away with if you wanted to explore this in more depth. Okay, our 2 minutes are up, so I hope that you were able to capture a couple ideas that you can look back on later, and still in the same vein of what can be some possible follow-up, and then drawing connections across all of the HLPs. I want to share this this picture that I have had in my mind about the interaction of all of the HLPs. And so thinking about really that collaboration is the engine, and then what's happening, all the parts that are happening within your collaboration. And that's where you're assessing, making instructional decisions, and then deciding if we need to adapt and make something more intensive for students and to intervene. And so those gears are all turning within that collaboration engine. And how and where is that taking place? So we have collaboration skills that we can practice and work on in our partnerships or in our teams. Use processes that can help make it more effective and efficient, although good collaboration sometimes has to be inefficient in order to be effective, because you have to take time with the human aspect of collaborating. And then collaborating is taking place a lot in meetings in order to make these gears turn, and for it to then happen within the classroom so that we're directly now benefiting students and meeting their needs. So for you, thinking about your role that you're in right now, and maybe a role that you predict for yourself, everybody can be a leader no matter what role you're in. And so I like this idea from Stephen Covey to think about all the things we worry about, we wish we could change or improve. That's our circle of concern. But we can all be leaders, and we can have influence. And so there's a little narrower then focus we can have on, well, can I make a difference and have influence? And then we have our tightest part of, what can I control? What's in my immediate that I know I can do a better job, and then incrementally it's going to have a bigger impact. The small things we do can make a big impact. And so as a takeaway or a call to action, are you able to think about how can the HLPs be a part of your circle of influence and your circle of control, so that you're able to have this moment where Demario came up to me and said, why hasn't anyone taught me like this before? Like, that is something that has driven me my whole career to think back to that moment, and try to really make it a goal for all professionals serving students with disabilities to provide evidence-based and high leverage practices. So this is from NIRN, the National Implementation Research Network. Today during this session with the HLP focus, these are effective innovations. And using them is then the effective implementation. But the part that is about our circle of influence and our circle of control is, how can you create an enabling context so that these things can happen? And so if that's through collaboration, making some structural changes, decisions that can help to make this actually come into fruition and improve outcomes. So kind of connecting these ideas, what is your context that you can influence and control so that your students are able to have that, and your teachers have that moment of, I have the instruction I need now, and it's making a huge difference for me. So we're going to put in the chat a couple of additional resources, but I want to highlight that there's so much out there to help you with in creating the enabling context. There are lots of videos that have been created for each HLP. Dr. Michael Kennedy at UVA has created those. They're on the HLP website that the CEC runs. There are observational checklists and rubrics, so you can see what it looks like and have a conversation point or do classroom walkthroughs, leadership and PD guides with activities that you could use in your own professional development. And so you can find the CEC, the Cedar Center websites. Highlight the Virginia TTAC Online, because they have a lot of the checklists and rubrics and some videos on their website and the Iris alignment tool. Where do the modules on Iris connect back? And that could be a useful resource too with the HLPs and your professional development that you might facilitate. So thank you for your time being here this morning and the energy that you dedicated to the reflection and listening and engaging in the chat. I thank you very much, and I'm glad that we were able to connect, and maybe I'll see some of you in our breakout session if you choose to come to my session later this afternoon. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I sincerely appreciate everyone's flexibility as we navigated crazy weather and